Bob of Death, from Zelly. My dad's best friend was a guy called Bob. Growing up, he was someone I'd consider an uncle, not blood-related, but part of the family in a sort of nebulous way. He was the first person to accidentally show me my first pair of boobs on screen, which was terrifying at the time and hilarious in retrospect. What kind of person shows Fast Times at Ridgemont High to an 8-year-old? He was well known around our town and something of a local legend for his ubiquitous personality. He was heavily involved in the local music scene and had earned the nickname Bob of Death, in reference to his interest in metal, the occult, and because it was funny. He was the kind of guy you'd see around town constantly. When I started going out to bars in my 20s, there was always a 50-50 chance he'd be at whatever bar I'd chosen, and I'd find out the friends I was with knew him too. He passed away suddenly and caused a shockwave in the community. I had never before realized how lucky I was that I'd gotten to know the real him until after he was gone. On the day that he died, I was in the last few weeks of a miserable job doing monotonous, lonely work. I usually was completely alone for 3/4 of the day. In the afternoon, as I was finishing up, I felt a sudden wave of pure sadness wash over me. I had no idea what had caused it, but I had to sit on the floor and just cry for about 20 minutes before I could calm myself down. I chalked it up to just being hangry or being miserable at work, as such things are not unknown to happen. That night, when I got the news that Bob had passed away that afternoon, around the same time as I was finishing up work, I let myself imagine that maybe he'd been telling me goodbye. It's been about 1.5 years since that day, and like all grief, it comes and goes. About 2 weeks ago, I got a new tattoo. It was a custom piece that was inspired by the Black Rabbit of Inlay from Watership Down. The night before I saw the final design from the artist, I had a very unusual dream. In the dream, I was in a cafe off of a main street in a familiar town I didn't bother placing. It was a busy, sunny day, and I sat at a table watching people walk by. Across from me was a person I couldn't quite make out, but I got the impression that he'd wandered into the coffee shop, seen me sitting there, and then joined me to chat. It was obvious that we knew each other, but as we conversed, it became clear we hadn't seen each other in quite a bit. He asked me how I'd been doing, where I was now, how my dad and stepmom were doing. I filled him in on the details. I'd moved across the country. He'd like it there, I think. Lots of good metal shows. My dad was doing fine. We all missed him. And, oh, did you want to see my new tattoo? I showed him the tattoo on my arm, and although I couldn't make out the design, as I hadn't gotten it yet, I knew it was perfect. He congratulated me on the choice and mentioned he'd always loved the art style for the Black Rabbit in the animated movie. We talked a bit more after that, but I don't remember the details. As he stood up to leave, and as I gave him an awkward hug, I realized it was, of course, Bob I'd been talking to. I woke up pretty abruptly, thanks to my cat scratching the side of his litter box. But even in that split second of coming out of the dream, I saw Bob there, and he knew that I knew it was him. I can explain the oddness of this dream in a subject matter ways just processing grief, getting a tattoo that symbolizes passing from one realm to the other in memoriam of those who have known who have passed on. Naturally, I'd think of someone I was very close to who had passed away recently. But I like to think this really was him, because if there's one person I would trust to pop back into my life after he died, it would be Bob. I mentioned this dream to my dad recently, and he shared with me he's actually had similar dreams in the last year, just Bob bobbing by to say hi. It's comforting to think this, and while in some ways it opens that wound up for me to miss him fiercely, I am still grateful to have seen him. And Zelly, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Lovely.
He sounds like a cool dude.
Very much so. Very much so.
Now, Paul, you were going to explain to me what the Black Rabbit of Inlay is, because I'm not familiar. I've never seen Watership or read Watership Down.
Oh. Obviously, it's a rite of passage here in the United Kingdom for children of a certain age. That they all have to go through Watership Down, and if you get through the other end, you have realised at 7 that you now know all about death, loss, prejudice, bigotry,
oh wow,
pain, emotion, and everything in between. It's an incredible piece of work for a children's book. It's incredible, Richard Adams's book. And the Black Rabbit of Inlay is essentially the rabbit version of the Grim Reaper.
Oh, okay.
But in the book, he is also sentient because I think he works. I'm trying to think what the god's called. The rabbit god, is it Frith? So it's a very expansive story. You know, the rabbits have hierarchies, and bigotry about different coloured rabbits and prejudice. And they all have a belief system of this great rabbit god. So it's, yeah. And you know, includes things like myxomatosis and vicious fights, because of one of those things everybody thinks rabbits are really cute. Well, they are until they decide to have a rabbit fight, and then they just rip the shit out of each other.
I mean, that doesn't come as much of a surprise. I used to know a girl in high school. Beautiful, beautiful woman. Oh, well, a girl back then. I was also in high school, just to be clear. And she was insane, like physically violent. She would attack people. And yeah, so that a beautiful thing can also be dangerous does not come as a shock.
Yes. So yeah, so that's what it symbolizes, and it's a very sort of the imagery is very different for the rabbit in the film is very different to the imagery used for everything else. So it gives it this kind of supernatural, spectral, sort of folklore-y look to it. It's a very sort of it's kind of done in a very sort of medieval style, whereas all the other rabbits are all obviously a modern, lifelike interpretation of what a rabbit looks like. This is very sort of ye olde drawing of a rabbit flying around.
Interesting. I got to look this up now. I'm very curious. Okay, no, that is more what I expected. That is, yeah, no, that is chilling. I love that. That is cool.
So yeah, you've done very well. Watership Down can destroy people still to this day. It's an extremely powerful. It's one of those. It's like Bambi. That people go, oh, well, it's just a cartoon. It'd be fine for the kids, this.
Right. It's like Grave of the Fireflies or something.
Yeah.
This is not for children.
It is, but it's not.
Right.
It's the right kind of book, but I think you've got to... It's one of those things that sometimes I think adults forget they were children, and therefore sometimes they can see something that is animation and they just presume that it will be fine. And...
Right.
You know, I was very fortunate growing up that I came from a very sort of forward-thinking house, so we didn't have things like banned books or things were censored or whatever, within reason, of course.
Sure.
But, you know, I know people who weren't allowed to watch Watership Down because their parents said it was too traumatic.
Interesting.
Which it is.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the rabbit was enough to give me, I'm sure, night terrors for later. What's interesting is when I was a kid, I used to play baseball, and people used to. I remember this kid on my baseball team saying this to me. He said, "I bet you're the kind of kid that your parents don't even let you watch movies with swearing in it." And I don't know where folks, and this was not a new sentiment. I'd had a couple of kids say this to me. They thought I was a very innocent kid. I was not. But apparently I look like I come from a household, or I looked at least like I came from a household where we wouldn't be allowed Watership Down. And of course, in actual fact, my mother let me watch The Shining, or made me watch The Shining with her when I was single digits at least. So yeah, very, very not very much the case at all. So I'm curious though, Paul, what was your first encounter with animation that wasn't specifically for kids that made you go, oh, maybe there's more to this than just kid stuff? Was it Watership Down?
No, I think it was probably the animated attempt to do the Lord of the Rings films.
Oh, was that Ralph Bakshi who did that?
I think so, yeah. So I would have been about 9 when I saw that. Because that was the only thing. It was the only version we had, other than the book.
Right.
And I listened to the audio because what got me into it was that the audio play was on Radio 4, and I was a voracious reader already by the age of 8. My reading age was 13, I think.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
I was a very precocious child.
I'm shocked. Look at this face. This is a shocked face.
And so obviously I'd kind of moved away from a lot of the books that perhaps some of my peers were reading at that time. So I was starting to read things like I'd read The Hobbit, and I'd read, all the Greek myths and legends, and by this point I'd already attempted to read Dracula. I found it a bit hard going, as I would imagine most 9-year-olds would.
Yeah.
And so my mum thought, well, he's obviously interested, so we started listening to the Lord of the Rings that was on Radio 4 at that time. They used to do a lot of serials like that, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and things.
Right.
And I absolutely adored it. And then the attempt to make the film, because it was a film that people in the UK were constantly trying to make. The Beatles were going to do a version of it. And they just couldn't get the funding. And so they tried this animation film and they ran out of money. So
I didn't know
it's
that.
basically the first book and a bit. So it's The Fellowship, and then it's the beginning of the Two Towers, and then the film just stops. And they never, and it didn't really do much at the cinema. And so it kind of just disappeared, and they never finished, they never made the rest of it or anything. So we had this until Jackson turned up to finally create the wonder that is the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it was that was probably the first time I saw a cartoon that made me think that it wasn't just, and that's no disrespect, I adore animation of all kinds, be it from comics to cartoons. I mean, Bugs Bunny will always be one of my heroes. And
Sure.
all that kind of, I was obsessed with Looney Tunes as well. I can read Lord of the Rings, but I can also laugh at Bugs Bunny. And I think that's what having an open-minded way of appreciating art in all its forms should be.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. For me, actually, funny enough, it was Ralph Bakshi that was sort of my introduction to the notion that animation could be more than just kid stuff, because although it was not quite Lord of the Rings, it was Fritz the Cat, which, folks, I don't know if you've seen Fritz the Cat. I don't know if I would recommend watching it at this point. I think it's very much a product of its time. But, oh boy, yep. I remember, I'll never forget, a friend of mine brought it over, and there was just a cat having sex with, I want to say, a crow, and the crow was making fun of his penis, and I just thought, well, all right, we have moved officially beyond the realm of Snow White and Looney Tunes.
Yeah, that was one of the first films we saw where people were taking advantage of the fact that their parents were completely out of touch with technology and didn't really understand what videos were. Because they say, oh, look, it's a cartoon. How bad can it be?
Well, I mean, if you're feeling adventurous, folks, I'm sure you can find it streaming anywhere. Yeah. Consider this an official warning. What's that?
It's not aged well.
No, it has not aged well. It is, yeah. It has not aged well.
Aged like milk.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was that, and then heavy metal. Now, I never liked heavy metal. I still don't like heavy metal, but that was, yeah. And I was actually kind of relieved because there was no weird animal fucking happening. So like that was a bonus for me. I was like, oh, okay, well, I hate the music and this thing annoys me. And I've never liked heavy metal. I once dated briefly a girl who was really like into the heavy metal aesthetic. And I just thought, oh God, no, this is not for me. But again, it did not have a cat and a bird having sex with each other, so it was a step up. You got to look on the bright side.
Yeah, I think that, and then I think when I finally realised that they were not that I ever thought that they weren't, but I think I remember the first time I saw Akira, and I just thought,
oh yeah,
this is just different level. This is amazing. That's 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago.
Yeah,
late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember when it came out, but Akira was just, oof.
I think it came out in 88.
Yeah, so I saw it was shown over here on Channel 4 about 1990, I think.
Okay. Oof. Akira completely changed my attitude on anime, because when I was in my early 20s, which is when I saw it, so it would have been early 2000s, I didn't like anime at all. I kind of judged my friends who did like it. I thought they were nerds. And I mean, to a certain degree, I still think they are, but you know, for different reasons. But at the time, yeah, I just thought, no, you know, this is nerd shit. Because part of it was, you know, watch Naruto, watch Bleach, watch One Piece. There's 400 episodes to this thing. I'm not going to do this. I've got so many other things I'd rather be doing than watching 400 episodes of a TV show. Like, no, thank you. But then, yeah, I think I was back then. Back then, kids, we had the Netflix was actually like a DVD rental through the mail.
Mm.
So you paid a certain amount a month, and they would send you a certain number of DVDs, and you would send them back in little paper mailers. And I saw so much cool shit because our local video store didn't carry stuff like that. So I got to see stuff like, you know, Jules A. Jim and The Seventh Seal and Akira. I know. Explains a lot about me. But I also got to see Ultra Christ and Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter. So there was an even distribution of quality and garbage.
Swings and roundabouts.
Exactly. Yeah. But I remember watching Akira and just, yeah, it completely, that and Neon Genesis Evangelion, Akira first and then Neon Genesis or the Evangelion, that both really kind of upended my notion of what to expect from an anime.
Yeah, we used to get a lot of Japanese kids shows shown in the UK, so I think we were probably a little bit more ready for stuff like that. Because when I was growing up, Battle of the Planets was one of my favourite shows.
Oh yeah,
primarily because the end. I remember the end. The end of that cartoon show has stayed with me probably 40 years, where they finally killed Zoltan, who's the leader of the baddies.
Right.
And G-Force finally finish him, but Mark and Jason kill him, or kill it. Because that's the interesting thing, that at the time I didn't realise it until about 10 years ago, that I think Zoltan is probably the first trans character in popular children's literature, because I'd never realised until I'd always grown up with the concept that it was a man, but when I've now looked into it, it's described as a they or a them.
Oh, interesting. Not awesome that it's the villain and it was murdered in the end.
It's a very spooky final episode, because I think Mark, who was like the second in command, who was too hot-headed to be the leader, so Jason had to be the leader, or whatever they called him in other English-speaking countries. He basically chases Zoltan down in this citadel, and he's no idea where he is, and he's lost, all his armies are gone and everything, and he knows he's trapped. And Mark just wanders around just whistling this ominous tune, and it's getting louder and louder as Zoltan tries to get away, and he can't hide, he can't get away from him until he finds him.
That's dark. That's like the last Rambo movie where Rambo basically turns into a slasher villain. When your hero becomes more scary than your villain, you fucked up.
Yeah. I find it's remarkable that a show I haven't watched for probably 40 years, I can still tell you that the 5 main characters were Mark, Jason, Princess, Tiny, and Keop.
The only thing I have any kind of recall like that for was Ninja Turtles. That's because there was 4 of them, and it's been reinforced over the years. If you ask me what like who the Thundercats were aside from Lion-O, and even that I only know because of Robot Chicken, I would have no idea.
Chitara.
Really? I knew a girl named Chitara. I guess that is where the name came from. Okay, that makes sense.
Panthro.
Now you sure?
One of them, there's 2 annoying thunder kittens in it. I can't remember their names. And then Mum-Ra. Mum-Ra! Because,
I know,
when you're a mutant cat warrior, you'd be fighting an evil mummy on an alien planet. Makes perfect sense. Thunder, thunder, cats.
We used to make proper kid shows.
Yes, they did. Yeah, she was cool, Chitara. She could run.
Zelly, I'm so sorry. We've gone really far away from your wonderful, wonderful story. But thank you so much for sharing that with us. And again, we hope that you have many more dreams of Bob to come.
Yes. You take as much from that communication as you need, because that's probably what it's there for
Absolutely.
and probably for Bob as well.